even though we've only had little times together. We can never allow cultural ideas of anything trump the biblical truth that God has given us. So God has called us as men to lead, protect, as husbands, as fathers. Our sons need to see us model this in the home and in the church. I think any time that we allow the culture to be the impact of what it should be like, we're going to see some long-term negative results in that. When I say we want to teach them how to lead, I think we need to teach them to lead with humility. The son needs to see us value our wife and others in the church. It does not mean that we know it all. As a dad, this past week, you mentioned Chap Bettis earlier. I was speaking with him. He wrote the book, as you're well aware of, Disciple Making Parent. And that's one of my top 3 books of all time now on parenting. He would say we need to remain aggressively teachable. I think our sons need to see that attitude in us as dads. And I think in our culture, it's an attitude of I know it all and I can take care of myself, or it's a very passive, media-looking dad that doesn't seem to know what's going on at any time. So I think that we can't ever assume the cultural identity of masculinity over biblical ones.
So you're telling me we shouldn't be raising up in the 1980s Rambos and in 2019 Star-Lords, I guess? I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, the superheroes of right now, they're huge in our grandkids' world, I think, and I see it in my kids' lives of wanting to see the superhero movies that keep coming out. And no, I think that there's a lot of danger that we see, aggressive behavior that takes place within our boys, especially when they have been exposed to some of these movies, that it causes them to become, I think, more aggressive in their behavior and not aggressive in being controlled.
That's good.
Yeah. So, Ron, what are some of the unique challenges today of raising men in a world where masculinity does not seem to be welcome? It's often considered almost a bad word.
Yeah, that's so true. We have, and for some, there's good reason for some of that having it's a bad word in our society. I mean, there are some things that men have done that has damaged men as a whole. And so one of the unique challenges, I believe, is raising our young men to be able to stand firm in what they believe and know why they believe what they believe. They need to be able to know what a real man is, not what the culture has said, and then they need to stand and demonstrate that to the world that's around them. They need to, as I mentioned earlier in Lewis's material, reject passivity. They need to be able to understand that real men don't do that. Real men are men that will stand for that which is right and be courageous in that. So when we see some of the abuses that women have gone through at the hands of men, a real man would stand up against that. When it comes to sex trafficking and things along those lines, real men would stand up against that. They wouldn't say this is acceptable in any form or fashion. And so there would be a sense of men standing firm on truth and things that are right. And I think that could change the perspective of what a real man is. But I don't think our culture understands what a real men are anymore.
True.
We agree with that, I think. With that brought up, to kind of look at somewhat the flip side, so you use a term, you mentioned that men need to reject passivity, and I think some in our culture would look at that and say, you're advocating toxic masculinity, quote unquote, and we would disagree with them on that. But do you think masculinity can ever be in any sense toxic?
Yes, if we follow what the world's way is, it can be very toxic. Or if we hold on to a view that some, I would say, within the church are guilty of doing, and that is leading with an iron hand and everybody better jump when I jump, and very authoritarian in their direction. I don't believe that that's how Jesus led or what the Bible talks about in leadership at all. And so I think that there's both the negative from the world stand. It can be very toxic, and it can be very toxic in the church if the perspective is that men are to lord over everybody under them. I don't think that's what we're called to do. We're called to lead, but we're not called to lord over. And so if we're lording over our wives, our children, those who we're in authority over, I think it can be very toxic.
Yeah, I think that's sad, and I think, unfortunately, I think all three of us would prescribe to some form of complementarianism, which is to say, we affirm that men are the head of the household, and that men are those who are given to preach and pastor. But I think, sadly, some have used the label of complementarianism to excuse that kind of toxic masculinity, to excuse even overt sexism.
Mm-hmm.
So. I would agree. Sorry, I'm grabbing a book off my shelf real quick.
You're fine.
Rob Renault, Visionary Parenting. Have you used any of his materials?
I've heard of him, but no, I have not.
Neither have I.
Familiar with his stuff.
Visionary Parenting is a great website and has some excellent materials in it. And he talks about a father's mission and the vision for biblical fatherhood in his book. And one of the things he talks about, and I think is very helpful in this area, is that we are created equal with our wives or the female counterparts, but yet we're created differently. And so we're created equal under God in value, worth, and dignity. And that's taught throughout the scriptures. But God has also created us to lead and to be the one who is going up for in the marriage and protecting. And I think you could use a little example as an understanding of this. I think of how God has created us, male and female, and there are differences between us, in that if you talk to the average couple, and I would say the majority of couples, and said if you're lying in bed together at night and you hear someone breaking through a window in your child's room, who's the first one up to go take care of the intruder of the house? Who's going to carry that baseball bat after him, the husband or the wife? And in most cases, the wife will say, he is. That's his job. And I think that just is a natural instinct, but that's because that's how God created us. He created us to take that kind of protective spirit into our marriages, into our home. So just an example, I think, of what we're talking about.
Okay, so Ron, we've established that there can be some troubling abuses of masculinity where it even can turn toxic, like the culture talks about. But how can parents best raise boys into men who can use that masculinity for good rather than for harm?
Man, I think that's a critical question for every parent to be working through. I think they first need to understand, what are we aiming for? What is the target that we want our sons to look like? And we need to be very intentional about raising them with that vision in mind, remembering that there is a battle for our sons that are going on, and the enemy wants to defeat our sons and lead them away. We need to be on alert. We need to pray. We need to really seek the Lord in giving us that wisdom on what our sons need and how to transfer that to our sons. I feel we've talked about Chap a couple times. One of the things in his book that was really helpful for me in a fresh way is, how do we pass the baton of faith to our children? I've always used that analogy with my kids. I'm wanting to pass this baton of faith on to you, and I want you to be able to pick it, grab it, and run with it in a healthy way. But he presented it that we're not doing this on a track that is a nice, simple track and field experience that everyone's in the stands clapping and cheering us on. We're doing this in a war zone where people are taking pot shots at our kids and pot shots at us. They want to destroy our kids' faith and our faith. And we need to be aware that this is the environment that we're trying to transfer or pass on our faith to our sons and our daughters, but our sons we're talking about mainly today. And I think that if parents do not stay consciously aware that there is a battle going on for our sons, we're not going to be having the greatest victory, because we're going to be taken down sometimes. And so I think we need to recognize there's a real battle here, and that we need to be intentional. We need to know why we're wanting to teach our sons what we're teaching them. And I think that a lot of times having other family or members, men in our lives that are speaking into our lives, but also into our sons' lives, is helpful here as well. So I think that those are all things that play into this, if I can say that. But know what you're aiming for and be intentional about going for it.
That's good.
That's, hopefully clear.
And how can parents also equip them to sacrificially spiritually lead in a household of their own one day? And I know you're seeing that in some of your sons now, or all of your sons are married and have kids, right?
3 of my sons are married.
Okay.
And 2 of them are in, one of them is in seminary right now, and another one is in university. So 3 of them are married and are doing this and doing good jobs at it. And I'm grateful to the Lord for that. I think the first thing is that it's modeled well in the home. We have to be living it as living examples Monday through Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, not just be Sunday parents that are intentional on Sunday in this area. We need to model it every day of the week. I think we need to have time for our sons. I think dads are so busy today, and they are so active in so many things that they don't have the time that they need to give to their sons. We need to have time for them, do things with them. I think we need to speak, we need to make sure they're speaking properly to our wives, to their mom, at all times. If they show any disrespect for their mother, or they raise their voices at their mother, I, as a dad, must correct them and know that and they need to know that this is never, ever acceptable, because a man doesn't treat a woman this way. And so I think that modeling and demonstration and living it out in the home and standing firm with those truths, our boys need to see that from me first, and they need to see it lived out.
That's good. So just to follow up to that, when you see that disrespect, you talked about correcting them. What kind of, I'm just going to assume, and because you have 5 boys and 10 kids, you don't have to name names, but I'm going to assume some child at some point was disrespectful. What kind of consequences did you implement?
Depending on the age of the child at the time, would all play into it. There are many discipline opportunities or discipline tools in our toolbox. So if they're really young, I think it might be a form of corporal punishment that takes place, and might be washing a mouth out with some soap. It might be because the tongue was used in an improper way. It might be that they need to go up into the room and write an apology to their mom and give dad the apology letter first for approval. It might mean that they have to, with that apology letter, buy their mom some flowers, or do something out of their own pocketbook that it affects them, that says, I am sorry and I'm paying for it, and I want to make this right with them. So I think there's a number of ways that we can do it, and it's pretty much age dependent. But I think, again, the modeling of it is important. I said to my kids when they were early on,